All right, we're going to continue building out our grocery list app. In this video, we're going to primarily focus on testing out our database functions that we created and then implementing those functions into our routes. So here, let's bring up our code. So here we have all of our various functions: create item, get all items, and delete item. Let's go ahead and test two of those functions. So let's test the create item here. So here, I'm going to call a function. So create item, and it accepts two arguments. And so it's going to be the item name. In this case, we'll just go ahead and put juice, and we'll give it a count. Let's put 2. And then if we want, we can just go ahead and call that, execute this file. So we'll save it. And let's see if it gives us any errors. So we'll say node, and then we'll say database.js. Let's see here. Oh, I have it commented out for some reason. Okay, let's go ahead and run it again. Save it. Let's execute it again. No such table, grocery items, and I think I did that last time. So it should be grocery item, not grocery items. So it's these small debugging things I have to do. All right, so let's run it one more time. There we go. Grocery item created, rows inserted 1. And what I'm going to do is bring up my database, and I'm going to connect to it just to see if we have juice in our database. So let's go ahead and open up database, and let's run our query. Yep, and there's juice. So everything is working as intended, and it's auto incrementing. We have 3, juice 2. All right, let's close that database, and let's move on to the next one. Let's test one more, and then we'll implement these into our routes. So here we're going to get all the items that have a console.log rows, and so it should return an array of objects. And so you'll see what that looks like in the terminal when it outputs. So we'll just call the get items, get all items, and we'll save it, and then we'll do node database.js, and let's see what we got here. I keep doing it, and this is the reason why we test, because I keep naming my table grocery items instead of grocery item. Let's just try to fix that in other places. Okay, I think it's fixed there. So now let's run this again. There we go. So we get our 3 items. So that's working, and we're good to go. And while we're at it, let's just go in and test the delete item. So we'll get rid of this function. So that's working properly. And we'll test out the delete item. And this doesn't, we'll define, going to eventually pass something into this method. But in this case here, we're just saying that our params is equal to 2. And we'll ultimately pass in a value or define a value that we could pass into this delete item. So it should run as is. And so we'll just say delete the last item we had on our list, which is item 3. And then we'll save it, and then we'll execute it. All right, I had to pause the video. I had a slight error in my query, so I had to change that around. I think I had delete grocery item where, but it should be delete from grocery item where item ID is equal to this, to the parameterized query. So let's go and execute our code. So we'll say node database.js, and then there we go. 1 row deleted, and now we're good. So what we're going to do is we're going to skip over to our app.js file and start to implement some of these database functions into our routes. And so here, our first route is just our go to home. And on our home page, we're going to display all the records that we have in our table. Now I did modify our index.hbs, our handlebars page. So I added some code here. And again, all of the code will be provided. I'm going to make it a link inside of the video description. But added a basic HTML page with some CSS code. This is just a link to Bootstrap that's going to give some style, some presentation to our code. And then I have a form that's going to accept some information. And then you'll see that we defining our routes here within the action attribute of our form. So this is key because whenever I click on the submit button, it's going to navigate, or it's going to retrieve the route that identifies with the / create item. And we're going to send it as a post. And then down below, we're using some of the functionality of handlebars to iterate through our objects and output them to a table. And so we'll talk more about this in the next video in terms of HTML and working with handlebars. But let's go ahead and implement some of our routes here. So we'll go to apps.js. All right, so this route here is our home page. And what we're going to do is we just want to return the records and then display all the records in our table. There's one thing that I'm forgetting here. And let's go back to our database.js file. So we have these functions. We have get all items. We have create item. And we have, let's go ahead and get rid of this here. That was just for testing purposes here. And we have, yeah, I think that's it. Get all items, create items, and delete items. But what we're going to do is we're going to export these so we can actually use this within the app.js file. And so to do that, we have to use module.exports. And then here, we're going to export all of the various functions. So we're going to export delete item. I think it's create item, and then get all items. And those are 3 functions that we want to use within app.js. So we'll save that. And within our app.js, we're going to bring over, we're going to include a require statement that will allow us to use those functions within the app.js file. So to do that, I'm gonna go to the top of my file here. I am gonna say const db operations equal require, and then I'll just give the file path, the relative file path to that resource or to that file. And so now I have access to the functions because I'm exporting them at the bottom of my file here. So I can use them in different files. And then I can now say db operations. I think I spelled that right. Yep. And this one here is going to get all records. So get all items. Now watch what I'm going to do here, because it's now I want to save time and just make sure I don't spend a lot of time on the videos maneuvering code. What I'm going to do is I want to actually execute the render function, the response.render function from within the database.js file. So here when we say get all items, I am going to define a response object. And then in my app.js file, I am going to pass in the response object. And so I'll copy this here. And I'll save it. And I'll go back to my database. I'll get rid of it here. I'll save it. And I'll go back to my database. And it's somewhat, it's not difficult, but it's cumbersome to actually get the values from this callback function. And so it's easier just to pass in response object And that way you have access to the returned rows, and you can just pass that data to your front end. So what I'm going to do here is, this was for testing purposes to log out the rows, so we can get rid of that. And then here's some code if you wanted to log out the rows individually, you can do that. But I want to paste in that response.render object within inside of the get all items function. And then it's going to go to the index.hbs. But in this case here, what I want to return back to the front end is just rows. All right, so let's go ahead and start up our app here. So we'll say npm start. All right, our app is on localhost 3000. So we go here. Let's refresh. All right, here's our items: sugar, honey buns. We're getting one quantity of one item of sugar, or two items of honey buns. So that's working. So let's look at some of the other routes. The video is getting a little over my liking in terms of 10 minutes. So let's pause here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to flush out the rest of the routes, and I'll talk through them and then talk a little bit about the front end code. And then we'll wrap up the series on the grocery list app. Now there's a lot that we can do in terms of like aesthetics and some of those things, but more so I'm concerned about understanding the functionality and kind of what's going on with how we're connecting all the pieces, the database, the front end, and then also using Express as the routing framework. So stay tuned for the next video, and we'll flush out some more of our routes and using some of those database functions. Stay tuned.